So if you really want to know what someone truly fears
Right.
and like what they are desperately betting their whole future on, you don't look at their social media.
Oh, definitely not.
Right. You don't listen to their dinner party conversations either. You look at their bank statements.
Exactly. The receipts literally do not lie.
They really don't. So over the last 12 years, Singapore's national budget has effectively doubled.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's swelled to a staggering 159 billion Singapore dollars for the 2026 financial year.
Which is just a massive number.
It is. So today, we are cracking open a decade of receipts to basically decode a nation's DNA. We've got this exhaustive analysis from CNA that tracks every major fiscal decision from 2015 right up to the parliamentary debates on Prime Minister Lawrence Wong's budget 2026.
Yeah, and it's such a fascinating data set to dig into.
It really is. We're going to track the money to find out exactly what the country is terrified of.
Yeah.
You know, from an aging, shrinking workforce to rising sea levels and what kind of hyper-productive AI-driven utopia it is trying to buy its way into.
Because, looking at a decade of raw financial data is basically the ultimate truth serum for policy.
Oh, totally.
You strip away the political speeches, the rhetoric, and what remains is the undeniable structural math of a nation's priorities.
Just the cold, hard numbers.
Right. And the numbers reveal these tectonic shifts in how a government perceives the baseline cost of survival in a volatile global economy.
Okay, let's unpack this sheer scale then, because the macro picture is the first thing that jumps off the page when you look at this deep dive.
Yeah, let's jump in.
We are looking at a timeline starting in the 2015 financial year, right, where total spending was $77.8 billion. Fast forward to the FY 2026 estimate, and we are looking at $159.06 billion.
That's practically double.
Literally. Breaking that down, it's about $137.3 billion in direct expenditure, plus another $21.7 billion in special transfers, a doubling of the budget in just over a decade.
Yeah. And to understand the mechanics of how a mature economy just doubles its spending in such a compressed time frame, we kind of have to isolate the anomaly sitting right in the middle of this data set.
Right, the 2020 financial year.
Exactly.
The $137.2 billion COVID-19 response. I mean, they rolled out 5 separate budgets in a single year.
Yeah, 5 budgets that permanently altered the fiscal architecture of the state.
Wow.
Because in economics, there's this concept known as the ratchet effect.
A ratchet effect.
Right. When a severe crisis hits, a government is forced to dramatically increase spending to prevent, a systemic collapse.
Sure, you have to save the economy.
But to deploy that unprecedented amount of capital, $137 billion, they have to build entirely new administrative machinery.
Oh, I see.
They create new distribution channels, new grants, new subsidies, and all these new bureaucratic frameworks just to manage it all.
And I'm guessing once the crisis fades, they don't just demolish all that newly built machinery.
Well, they rarely do. The immediate emergency subsides, obviously, but the newly expanded institutional capacity remains.
That makes sense.
And the public's expectation of what the government can and should provide has also shifted upward.
Right. People get used to a certain level of support.
Exactly. The previous spending ceiling has basically been shattered. So while spending dropped slightly after 2020, it never actually returned to the pre-2020 trajectory.
It set a new floor.
Exactly. That pandemic response proved the state could mobilize massive capital, which is what made the palatability for a $159 billion budget in 2026 even possible.
It's like reviewing a friend's credit card statements over 10 years.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. Like, you can easily spot the month their car transmission exploded, or they had a massive medical emergency. That's the FY 2020 spike.
Yeah, a huge one-time hit.
But zooming out, you notice their baseline monthly spend just generally doubled over the decade.
Yeah.
Like, they upgraded their apartment, they buy organic groceries, they have way more expensive subscriptions.
Yep, lifestyle creep.
Exactly. But here is the critical question, and I want to push back on this a bit. If a national budget doubles in 11 years, is that proof of a thriving, prosperous nation enjoying a higher standard of living? Or is it a warning sign that the cost of merely maintaining the status quo has skyrocketed?
That is the million-dollar question, or I guess the billion-dollar question.
Right.
But honestly, the data points heavily toward the cost of the status quo just becoming exponentially more expensive.
Really? Just to stay afloat.
Yeah, think about it. The global environment of 2015 was fundamentally different. We were in an era of relatively stable supply chains, lower geopolitical friction, and a much younger demographic profile.
Okay, that's true. Things were calmer.
Right. Navigating the world in 2026 requires a vastly different financial engine just to keep the lights on. The country isn't necessarily buying nicer groceries, to use your analogy.
Right, right.
The basic price of economic and social security has simply doubled.
Wow. Okay, throwing around figures like 159 billion can feel incredibly abstract, especially for you listening on your commute right now.
Yeah, it's hard to visualize $1 billion, let alone 159.
Exactly. So let's move from the billions to the money people actually feel in their pockets. Let's look at the special transfers data.
Okay, yes. These are the immediate relief measures.
Right.
The portion of the budget that interacts directly with household and business cash flows. So we are talking about the cash vouchers, the utility bill rebates, the top-ups to savings accounts.
Things normal people actually see.
Exactly.
Well, the CNA report outlines a really fascinating trajectory here. In that FY 2020 pandemic year, special transfers hit an astronomical $33.5 billion.
Which was totally necessary at the time.
Right. But as we moved into the recovery years, the transfers didn't just taper off and disappear. They actually grew for 3 consecutive years.
Yeah, they did.
They climbed from $2.7 billion in FY 2022 to an estimated $3.8 billion in FY 2025.
Which is a huge jump.
And that 2025 figure includes some very highly visible injections, right?
Yeah.
Like $2 billion for the SG60 vouchers and another $1 billion in CDC vouchers designed explicitly to alleviate cost of living pressures.
What's fascinating here is the collision between behavioral economics and the FY 2026 budget twist.
Oh, the twist. Let's get into the twist.
Because leading up to this year, analysts broadly assumed that cost of living pressures, driven by global inflation, were so deeply entrenched that the government would have absolutely no choice but to institutionalize these handouts.
With making them a permanent thing.
Exactly. The expectation was that special transfers would become a permanent, ever-expanding fixture of the budget.
But they shrank it instead.
They did.
Down to $2.84 billion for FY 2026.
Reversing a 3-year trajectory of increasing relief.
But why pull the plug now? I mean, inflation hasn't magically disappeared. The cost of chicken rice and electricity are still massive pain points for everyone.
Yeah, people are still feeling the pinch.
So if the government has the $159 billion to spend, why intentionally shrink the one segment of the budget that provides immediate, tangible relief to the citizen?
Well, from a macroeconomic perspective, relying on special transfers is incredibly dangerous over a long time horizon.
Why is that?
Because when a government issues cash vouchers, it is essentially subsidizing consumption. It is injecting money into the economy to help people buy goods that have become more expensive.
Okay, which helps people in the short term.
It does. But if that becomes a permanent policy, you run into 2 major structural problems. First, you risk fueling the very inflation you are trying to fight.
Because you're giving people more money to spend.
Exactly. You are artificially boosting demand without actually increasing the supply of goods.
Yeah.
More money chasing the same amount of goods means prices go up even more.
Oh, wow, right.
And second, you severely restrict your fiscal flexibility for long-term investments. Every dollar spent subsidizing today's consumption is a dollar not spent on building tomorrow's infrastructure or, retraining a worker.
Ah, I see. We are basically talking about the difference between taking painkillers and engaging in physical therapy.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
Right. The vouchers are the painkillers. If you have a broken leg from a global pandemic or a massive inflation shock, you absolutely need the painkillers to function.
You literally can't walk without them.
Exactly. But if you rely on them every single day for years, your muscles just atrophy. You never actually heal the structural problem.
And the finance ministry is forcing the economy off the financial painkillers.
Wow.
By tightening the tap to $2.84 billion, they are signaling that the responsibility for managing the cost of living must shift back to structural mechanisms.
Like what?
Specifically, wage growth driven by productivity. They are gambling that the broader economic engine can take the load before the withdrawal symptoms get too severe.
That is a huge gamble. Let's view this through the lens of behavioral psychology for a second.
Okay, let's do it.
Put yourself in the shoes of a citizen. You have spent 3 years baking these increasing CDC and SG60 vouchers into your household budget. It becomes the new baseline,
Oh, for sure. People plan around them.
Right. And human beings suffer from profound loss aversion. The psychological pain of losing a $500 voucher is like twice as intense as the joy of receiving it in the first place.
It's a proven psychological fact.
So even if the macroeconomy is recovering, the visceral experience of seeing the relief tap tighten feels like a direct loss of support from the government.
Yeah, and the political capital required to execute that reduction is immense.
It has to be.
The government is absorbing guaranteed short-term dissatisfaction in exchange for long-term fiscal discipline.
That's a tough trade-off.
It is. They are acutely aware of the loss aversion you mentioned, which is why the transfers weren't just abruptly cut to zero.
Right, $2.84 billion is still a massive injection of cash.
It absolutely is. But the downward vector is a very deliberate communication to the market and the public, it says. The era of escalating unconditional relief is over.
Wow. They might also be turning off the short-term relief tab because they are looking at the long-term forecast, and the incoming wave is honestly terrifying.
You're talking about the demographic shift.
Yes. Let's talk about the biggest single slice of this 159 billion pie, the silver tsunami, and why social spending is just devouring the budget.
Yeah, this is the really structural stuff. So the social spending category encompasses the ministries of health, education, national development, social and family development, sustainability, and culture.
Okay. A huge chunk of the government.
Exactly. And if we look at historical data stretching all the way back to FY 2002, social spending has maintained a median of roughly 46.3% of the total budget.
So the baseline rule of thumb is that almost half of everything the state collects goes right back into the social fabric.
Yeah, that is the historical norm. During the peak of the pandemic in 2020, obviously, it spiked. It hit 51.5%.
Sure, because of all the emergency health care and social support.
Right. But the crucial takeaway from the CNA analysis is that we have not returned to the median.
We haven't.
No. The FY 2026 estimate locks social spending in at a stubbornly high 47.9% of total expenditure.
Okay, let's attach the raw dollar amounts to those percentages, because I think that's where the sheer scale of this becomes clear.
Let's hear it.
In FY 2015, the total spend on social development was $31.3 billion. For FY 2026, the estimate is $65.8 billion.
More than double.
Right. And the undisputed heavyweight champion driving this huge surge is the health ministry.
Unsurprising.
They accounted for $20.4 billion in the revised 2025 estimates, and they are projected to swallow $22.5 billion this year.
Just for healthcare.
Yeah, and the mechanics of demographic change are entirely unforgiving.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a $22.5 billion healthcare allocation is not really a policy choice. It is a structural inevitability.
Because the population's getting older.
Exactly. When a population ages, they do not just require a linear increase in medical care. The complexity and the cost of intervention scale exponentially.
Because older patients have more complex compounding health issues. Right. The CNA sources highlight two massive national initiatives designed to absorb and manage this demographic reality: Age Well SG and Healthier SG.
Right. Let's break down the mechanics of those two programs, because they represent a massive philosophical shift in how a country handles getting old.
They really do.
So Age Well SG focuses on keeping seniors active and integrated into their local communities, right? Like upgrading infrastructure so they can age in place rather than building massive, isolated institutional care facilities.
Which is much better for their mental health and, frankly, cheaper than building nursing homes.
Yeah. And then Healthier SG is the preventative health pivot.
Yes. And Healthier SG is, frankly, one of the most ambitious behavioral economics experiments currently running on a national scale anywhere in the world.
Oh, wow. A behavioral experiment.
Think about it. The traditional model of public health care is entirely reactive.
Right. You get sick, you go to the hospital.
Exactly. You wait until a citizen suffers a catastrophic health event, like a heart attack, a stroke, late-stage diabetes, and then the state spends hundreds of thousands of dollars on acute emergency care, surgery, and long-term hospitalization.
Which is incredibly expensive.
It's the most expensive way to do healthcare. Healthier SG inverts that entire model. The government is essentially paying upfront to modify citizen behavior today.
Oh, I see. They're subsidizing gym memberships, healthy food choices, early diagnostic screenings, and regular consultations with a dedicated family doctor.
Right. By heavily subsidizing the cost of preventative maintenance today, the actuarial calculation is that they will avoid those catastrophic billion-dollar emergency care bills tomorrow.
It's an investment.
It is a massive upfront capital expenditure designed specifically to flatten the long-term medical inflation curve.
We are essentially watching a national pivot from pouring concrete for new emergency rooms to basically paying people to not show up at the emergency room in the first place.
That's a great way to summarize it.
But, and I have to push back here, if social spending has doubled from $31 billion to nearly $66 billion, a citizen looking at these numbers is going to ask a very pragmatic question.
What's that?
Are the schools twice as good? Are the hospital wait times twice as fast?
Right, right.
Are we actually feeling twice as supported, or is this $66 billion bill simply the absolute bare minimum cost of keeping an older, more fragile population alive?
Yeah.
Like, are we spending double the money just to stay in the exact same place?
The harsh reality of medical inflation dictates that, yes, we are running twice as fast just to stay in the exact same place.
Wow, that's depressing.
It is, but we have to factor in something called Baumol's cost disease.
Baumol's cost disease? What is
Yeah.
that?
It's an economic concept which explains why costs in labor-intensive sectors like healthcare rise even if productivity doesn't.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Sure, you cannot automate a nurse's bedside care or a surgeon's complex physical intervention the way you can automate, say, a manufacturing line or software development.
Right, you still need a human being in the room.
Exactly. Therefore, as the broader economy grows and general wages rise across the board, you must pay healthcare workers significantly more just to retain them.
Otherwise, they'll leave for easier, higher-paying jobs.
Precisely. Which drives up the baseline cost of care. Combine that economic phenomenon with a much larger volume of elderly patients, and that $66 billion is simply the price of admission.
So we aren't getting double the quality.
No, you are not buying luxury healthcare. You are funding the baseline demographic ticket,
Which triggers an immediate, terrifying math problem for the country.
the dependency ratio.
Exactly. If the healthcare bill is rocketing to $22.5 billion and the population is rapidly aging, that means the proportion of working-age adults is shrinking.
Yes, the math gets very difficult very quickly.
Right, because in a traditional tax system, the workers pay for the social safety net of the retirees. So how does the Treasury avoid a collapse when the denominator, meaning the workers generating income tax, goes down, but the numerator, the elderly consuming healthcare resources, completely explodes?
You are describing the single greatest existential math problem facing the Treasury today.
It seems impossible to solve.
Well, the CNA article cites KPMG expert Harvey Koenig, who issues a very stark, unavoidable warning about this.
What did he say?
He noted that as the base of working individuals shrinks, the reliance on other forms of revenue must absolutely increase.
Because you can't just tax the workers more.
Right. You cannot simply squeeze the shrinking middle class with higher income taxes to bridge a $66 billion gap.
Right, that would be disastrous.
It would crater domestic consumption, it would disincentivize labor, and it would basically break the domestic economic engine.
So you have to look for money where it is concentrated but incredibly hard to catch.
Yeah.
Enter the era of proxy wealth taxes.
Yes. Let's trace the philosophy of this back to PM Lawrence Wong's 2022 speech.
Okay.
He articulated very clearly that wealth taxes are not merely a punitive measure or just some desperate revenue grab.
Yeah.
He said they are an integral structural necessity for the tax system to reduce social inequalities and build a fairer society in an era of demographic imbalance.
The phrase proxy wealth taxes is the crucial mechanism here. Because according to KPMG's Ajay Kumar Sanganiria in the CNA piece, we've seen a highly targeted slew of these measures since 2018.
We really have. They've been very specific.
Right, like they raised property tax rates. They increased individual tax rates for the absolute top income earners. They introduced a new additional registration fee, the ARF, specifically targeting luxury cars.
Yeah, that was a big one.
And they instituted massive increases in stamp duties, heavily targeting high-end residential properties and foreign buyers, particularly in 2018 and 2023.
The term proxy reveals both the genius and, frankly, the limitation of this strategy.
How so?
Well, a common critique from the public is often, why use a proxy at all?
Right. If someone is worth $100 million, why doesn't the government just pass a law implementing a direct net worth tax?
Exactly. Say a flat 2% annual levy on all assets.
Just cut straight to the source, look at the bank account, take the percentage, and fund the hospitals. It sounds so simple.
It sounds simple, but a direct net worth tax is an absolute enforcement nightmare.
Really?
Oh, yeah. In a globally connected world, it is incredibly easy for the ultra-wealthy to evade. Wealth, that tier, is rarely sitting in a simple checking account.
That's true. It's tied up in investments.
It is highly mobile. It is tied up in complex corporate structures across multiple jurisdictions, offshore trusts, fine art, private equity.
And all of those have highly subjective valuations.
Exactly the problem. How do you definitively tax a 15% stake in a privately held pre-revenue tech startup?
You can't. Not accurately.
No. If you try to implement a direct net worth tax, the government will spend years tied up in tax courts fighting armies of accountants over the subjective valuation of illiquid assets.
Which costs the government more money than they'd probably collect.
Right. Furthermore, if you even threaten a direct tax on capital, that capital will simply flee to a more favorable jurisdiction before the law even passes.
Ah. So instead of trying to tax the invisible subjective net worth, you wait for them to spend it in the physical world. You tax the manifestation of the wealth.
The mechanism is elegant because it relies entirely on the desire of the wealthy to actually enjoy their capital.
Right, you want to buy nice things.
You cannot offshore a good-class bungalow in Singapore. You cannot hide a Bentley in a Cayman Islands shell corporation if you actually want to drive it down Orchard Road.
That's a great point.
When a high net worth individual decides to purchase a piece of luxury real estate or import a high-end vehicle, that is an objective, highly visible transaction.
You can't hide a mansion.
Right. So by aggressively taxing those specific physical manifestations through proxy taxes like the ARF or the additional buyer's stamp duty, the government creates a highly effective revenue stream that is virtually impossible to evade.
Well, I always think of it like a luxury tax at a theme park.
Oh, I like this. How so?
So everyone pays the baseline ticket to get into the park, right?
Yeah.
And then it gives you access to all the basic rides. But if you want the VIP Fast Pass lines, if you want the exclusive luxury cabana by the waves pool with the private waiter, you are suddenly hit with a massive, undeniable premium.
Right.
And that premium goes directly into subsidizing the maintenance of the park, the security, and keeping the basic tickets affordable for everyone else.
It is essentially a voluntary tax on luxury consumption.
Exactly. If you don't want to pay the massive ARF, you just don't buy the luxury car.
Yeah.
You still have access to one of the best public transit systems in the world.
Yeah. But let's explore the breaking point of this strategy because it's not foolproof.
Okay, let's hear it.
We know that capital is mobile. If you squeeze the top tier too hard with escalating property taxes and luxury car fees, do they eventually just park their assets somewhere else?
That's the fear, right?
Yeah. Do they look at the $500,000 premium on a car or the 60% stamp duty on a property and say, you know what, the VIP pass is just too expensive here. I'm going to take my capital to a different theme park.
Wow. So how does the government prevent that?
That is the delicate, high-wire balancing act the finance ministry navigates every single day.
They must have incredibly smart people working on that.
The government is calculating the exact premium they can extract before triggering capital flight. What keeps the ultra-wealthy anchored in Singapore, willing to pay these exorbitant proxy taxes, is the broader ecosystem.
What do you mean by ecosystem?
They are paying a premium for geopolitical stability in a volatile region. They are paying for physical safety, a rigid rule of law that protects contracts, and a strong, stable currency.
They're essentially buying certainty.
They are buying certainty, and certainty is the most expensive commodity in the modern global economy.
It really is.
The ministry is betting that the proxy taxes are still viewed by the global elite as a fair price for that certainty.
But they can't push it too far.
The calibration must be agonizingly precise. If the proxy taxes cross the psychological threshold from premium access fee to punitive confiscation, the capital will leave, and the $22 billion healthcare bill still has to be paid.
Right, which leads us to the other half of the survival equation. Taxing the ultra-wealthy through proxy consumption is only one lever. You cannot tax your way to a $159 billion budget purely on Bentleys and bungalows.
No. The math just doesn't work.
The other necessary lever is making sure the remaining shrinking workforce can produce vastly more economic value.
Right.
If we have fewer workers, each individual worker needs to become an economic superhero. Enter the productivity panic and the great AI push.
The historical context here is vital to understand why the current budget looks the way it does. We have to rewind 10 years to budget 2016.
Okay, taking us back a decade.
Then Finance Minister Heng Swee-Keat made a very sobering observation to Parliament. He noted that productivity growth had been relatively flat since 2013.
Flat for 3 years.
Yes. Despite government efforts, the efficiency of the economy was stagnating. He explicitly warned that the nation had to keep working on this issue.
And looking at the CNA analysis of Budget 2025 and 2026, they haven't just kept working on it. They have unleashed a tidal wave of capital to force the issue.
They really have.
I mean, PM Wong stated flatly that increasing productivity is the single best way to adjust to the structural impact of rising prices. and he backed that assertion with a staggering $3 billion top-up to the National Productivity Fund in 2025.
To contextualize that $3 billion figure, we have to look at the fund's historical burn rate.
Okay, what was it normally?
Annual spending from the National Productivity Fund traditionally hovered between $133 million and $324 million.
Oh, wow. So $3 billion is a massive leap.
It was a measured incremental program before, but in the revised estimates for FY 2025, expenditure from that specific fund jumped to $3.98 billion.
That is astronomical.
Furthermore, the combined spending from the Skills Development Fund and Lifelong Learning Endowment Fund crossed the billion-dollar mark for the very first time, hitting $1.33 billion.
The scale of the capital injection is shocking, but what is more important to understand is the philosophical shift in how they are defining productivity now.
Exactly.
Assistant Professor Jue Yao Huor from NTU makes a crucial distinction in the article. He points out that historical productivity policy was focused on traditional firm-level upgrading.
Right. And traditional upgrading meant providing a modest grant to a local bakery so they could buy a slightly faster oven.
Or subsidizing a logistics firm to move from paper ledgers to basic digital spreadsheets.
Yeah, exactly. It was about wringing incremental efficiency out of existing processes.
But Assistant Professor Chua notes that the definition has now aggressively broadened to what he calls frontier capabilities.
Which brings the entire conversation to the AI revolution outlined in Budget 2026.
This part is wild.
The government isn't just asking companies to buy better software anymore. They are actively subsidizing the integration of cutting-edge artificial intelligence across the board.
And the 2026 initiatives are incredibly specific. They're offering citizens 6 months of free access to premium AI tools if they complete selected AI courses.
That's a huge individual incentive.
They are scaling Lorong AI, which is a dedicated physical hub for the AI community, into a massive AI park at One North. They are expanding the Productivity Solutions grant to cover a much wider array of AI tools for small businesses.
And perhaps the most aggressive lever is the expansion of the Enterprise Innovation Scheme.
Oh, yes. This grants businesses a 400% tax deduction on specific AI expenditures.
Yeah.
Let's pause and explain the mechanics of a 400% tax deduction, because that number sounds absurd to a layperson. Like, how does that actually change behavior on the ground?
It radically alters the risk calculation for a corporate CFO.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's say a mid-sized engineering firm is considering spending $100,000 to integrate a custom AI model to optimize their supply chain.
Okay.
Normally, that $100,000 is a risky capital expenditure. If the AI doesn't work out, you just lost $100,000.
Right.
But under a 400% tax deduction scheme, the firm gets to deduct $400,000 from their taxable corporate income. So if we assume a corporate tax rate of 17%, deducting $400,000 reduces their actual tax bill by $68,000.
Let me do the math on that. So the $100,000 software effectively only cost the company $32,000.
Exactly. The government is heavily subsidizing the risk of innovation. They are artificially lowering the barrier to entry so dramatically that a company would be financially irresponsible not to experiment with AI integration.
That is brilliant. And Parul Munshi, a partner at PwC, summarized the macro intent of all this perfectly in the CNA piece. She said the goal is to make the workforce AI fluent rather than AI dependent.
And that distinction is the core of the entire strategy.
Why is that distinction so important?
Because the fear surrounding AI globally is that it is a tool of pure automation, that it exists to replace the human worker.
Right. Everyone is terrified of losing their jobs to a chatbot.
Exactly. The Singaporean budget is betting on a different paradigm. AI as augmentation. They view these tools as cognitive exoskeletons for the workforce.
Cognitive exoskeletons. I love that.
By deeply embedding AI into both the enterprise level through massive tax deductions and the individual level through free premium access, the nation is attempting to position itself as a global testbed for responsible, hyper-efficient AI integration.
You know, the idea of the state stepping in to provide 6 months of free premium AI tools directly to citizens is a visceral, fascinating move.
It's very forward-thinking.
Think about the historical parallel. It's like the government giving every single citizen a free, top-of-line power drill at the dawn of the 1900s, pointing to an empty lot and saying, we don't know exactly what you're going to build, but go figure it out.
That's a great analogy. They are democratizing the tools of future economic production.
But let's look at the skeptical counterargument here, though.
Okay, play devil's advocate.
We established earlier that the government threw money at traditional productivity for a decade, and former Finance Minister Heng Swee-keat admitted the results were relatively flat.
Right, he did.
Is pouring $3 billion into the National Productivity Fund for AI actually going to move the needle? Or are we just funding a massive state-sponsored misallocation of capital, chasing the newest, shiniest Silicon Valley buzzword, just so we feel like we are making progress?
The risk of misallocated capital is very real. Whenever a government heavily subsidizes a specific technology, you will inevitably see companies adopting it purely to harvest the tax credits without generating any real structural efficiency.
Right, just checking a box to save on taxes.
Exactly. However, the economic argument for this $3 billion gamble relies on the nature of artificial intelligence itself. AI is not just a faster oven for the bakery.
What is it then?
Economists classify it as a general-purpose technology. That puts it on par with the steam engine, electricity, or the internet.
Oh, wow. It fundamentally alters how all other work is done.
Precisely. When you integrate a general-purpose technology, you don't just speed up old processes, you enable entirely new categories of high-value output that were previously impossible. The $3 billion bet is that embedding this technology will unlock a massive leap in total factor productivity. Given the shrinking denominator of the workforce we discussed earlier, achieving a geometric leap in output per worker isn't just an aspiration.
It's a necessity.
It is the only viable mathematical pathway to sustain the $159 billion budget.
It is a high-stakes race between a shrinking demographic reality and the promise of a hyper-productive technological exoskeleton.
It really is a race against time.
But, building a highly productive, AI-driven, socially equitable utopia is a beautiful vision that becomes completely irrelevant if the ground it's built on is underwater.
Right, which forces us to look at the final and perhaps most critical section of the CNA analysis.
The existential threat of climate change and sustainability as a life and death matter.
That exact phrase, life and death matters, was utilized by former Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong when discussing climate change defenses.
That's strong language.
In the lexicon of political speech, deploying those specific words immediately signals a fundamental shift in capital allocation.
Yeah, the infrastructure spending required to physically defend an island nation against rising sea levels is almost difficult to comprehend.
It's staggering.
We are looking at the Coastal and Flood Protection Fund, which was established in 2020 and just received a massive $5 billion top-up in the 2025 budget.
Just for flood protection.
Right. And beyond direct capital injection, there's the commitment from Budget 2022 to issue $35 billion in public sector green bonds by 2030, purely to fund core resilient infrastructure like advanced water and waste treatment facilities.
But erecting $5 billion seawalls to hold back the ocean is entirely defensive. It is just treating the symptom of a warming planet.
Right, it doesn't solve the core issue.
No. The offensive side of the climate equation, forcing the domestic economy to actually stop emitting greenhouse gases, is far more economically complex, and that mechanism is the carbon tax.
Singapore was actually the first country in Southeast Asia to introduce a carbon tax back in 2019.
They were pioneers in the region.
Now, the CNA report notes that PM Wong is carefully calibrating its upward trajectory beyond 2027.
And the carbon tax is arguably the most delicate and dangerous policy instrument in the entire $159 billion budget.
Why dangerous?
KPMG's Harvey Koenig emphasizes the need for progressive carbon taxes to reward decarbonization, alongside performance-based pathways for large emitters.
Okay, let's translate that out of consultant speak for a second. How does a progressive carbon tax actually function on the ground for a major industrial polluter?
Well, you don't just slap a punitive, flat $50 per ton tax on every factory on Jurong Island and walk away.
Right, that would be chaos.
If you do that, you crush the economy overnight. Industries would just collapse. Instead, you create a dynamic sliding scale. You financially coerce the market.
Coerce the market? How?
A massive petrochemical facility might face a high baseline carbon tax, sure, but the government provides a pathway. If the facility invests capital into specific green technologies, carbon capture, or efficiency upgrades, their tax rate drops progressively.
Ah, so you incentivize them to upgrade.
Exactly. You create a financial mechanism where it becomes cheaper for the corporation to invest in green infrastructure than to continue paying the baseline tax.
But the CNA article explicitly highlights a tension here. PM Wong noted that Singapore needs to calibrate its moves to be a responsible global citizen, while simultaneously ensuring it does not put itself at a competitive disadvantage relative to other countries.
This is the paradox of global climate policy. It's often referred to as the problem of carbon leakage.
Carbon leakage. Let's explore the mechanics of that. I think an analogy might help here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine the global economy is a massive toll road, and Singapore controls one small, highly efficient lane on that road.
Okay, tracking with you.
If Singapore raises the toll on its lane too aggressively in the name of carbon reduction, the massive freight trucks representing the petrochemical and manufacturing sectors, they don't stop driving.
No, of course not. They still have goods to deliver.
They simply merge into a different lane. They relocate their operations to a neighboring country with looser environmental regulations and cheaper, dirtier power.
Exactly.
So global carbon emissions haven't actually decreased at all. The pollution simply moved a few hundred miles next door.
And worst of all, Singapore has now lost the massive corporate tax revenue from those industries.
The exact revenue it desperately needs to fund the $5 billion seawalls and the $22 billion healthcare bills.
That is the pragmatic, brutal reality of carbon leakage.
It's a catch-22.
It really is. The calibration PM Wong speaks of is an acknowledgement that a green transition must be economically sustainable, or it triggers an industrial exodus.
Right.
You have to raise the carbon tax just high enough to force innovation, but keep it just low enough that relocating a billion-dollar refinery to another jurisdiction remains financially unviable for the corporation.
Hold on, though. I have to look at the contradiction here. We're talking about calibrating for competitive disadvantage, while the former prime minister is explicitly calling rising sea levels a life-and-death matter.
It sounds hypocritical on the surface.
Right. If the island is quite literally sinking beneath the waves over the next 50 years, why on earth are we worried about the cost of the lifeboats? Does maintaining competitive advantage in petrochemicals matter at all if the financial district is flooded?
It is the ultimate paradox. But economically, the two are inextricably linked.
How so?
You cannot divorce the existential threat from the economic reality. You need the revenue generated by a hyper-competitive, fossil fuel-adjacent economy today to afford the multi-billion-dollar climate defenses required for tomorrow.
Wow, that is a dark reality.
If you intentionally cripple your industrial base to achieve net zero immediately, you attain moral purity, sure, but you lose the financial capacity to survive the physical impacts of climate change that are already locked in globally.
You literally can't afford to save yourself.
Exactly. The slow, agonizing calibration of the carbon tax is an attempt to thread that impossible needle.
Which really brings the story of these 12 budgets full circle.
It really does tie everything together.
When we step back and look at the vast expanse of data from FY 2015 to the budget 2026 estimates, we are watching the real-time financial evolution of a nation-state.
We are.
We see the shift from an era of traditional, relatively inexpensive economic expansion into the massive, ceiling-shattering crisis management of the COVID years.
And now we are looking at the new equilibrium.
Exactly. It is a future that requires a hyper-productive, AI-augmented workforce, funded by carefully calibrated proxy wealth taxes, desperate to manage the spiraling healthcare costs of an aging population while literally building walls to hold back the ocean.
It's a lot to manage all at once.
The fundamental baseline cost for just surviving in this century has become astronomically expensive.
The era of cheap growth and easy demographic dividends is definitively over.
Over and done with.
Every single percentage point of GDP growth and every year of increased life expectancy moving forward requires immense targeted strategic investment.
There are no easy wins left.
None. The state is utilizing every lever at its disposal, taxing luxury consumption, subsidizing preventative health, and democratizing artificial intelligence to engineer a society capable of bearing that unprecedented cost.
And that brings the lens right back to you, listening to this deep dive.
Yeah, what does this mean for the individual?
We started by exploring how a national budget is a reflection of deep anxieties and soaring ambitions. We've talked about $5 billion seawalls, $22 billion healthcare budgets, and $3 billion AI funds.
Massive structural investments.
But if you look closely at the underlying mechanics of all these policies, if the government is heavily subsidizing your preventative healthcare so you don't become a burden on the system, and simultaneously giving you free premium AI tools so your economic output multiplies, the ultimate infrastructure that Singapore is investing these billions in isn't concrete, or data centers, or seawalls.
No, it isn't.
The most critical infrastructure is you.
Mhm.
It is your physical health, your cognitive skills, and your adaptability to technological shock. The nation is betting $159 billion that its citizens can become the economic superheroes required to make the math work.
That is exactly what they're betting on.
So as you look at your own personal budget of time, energy, and resources for the next decade, are you upgrading yourself as aggressively as the nation needs you to?
That is the real question to walk away with today.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the numbers. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep exploring the hidden mechanics of the economy, and we'll see you next time.
If you found this episode helpful, do subscribe to my channel for more smart finance content. I'll see you in the next one soon.